Be'ez Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Baba Basra Daf Kuf Mem 140. We're going to begin with the new parak Be'ez Hashem Misha Mace. Okay, this we're beginning on Daf Kuf Lamed Tes Amid Beis. The Gemara says, Misha Mace, a person died. A person died v'hiniach banim u'banis, and he left over boys and girls. So boys generally should inherit everything, right? But the problem is he left over young girls and they need support. And part of the chiyuv d'Rabbanan is that a man has to support his daughters until they get married, until they become an adult of 12 years old at that time. And therefore, some of the assets need to be designated for the support of the daughters. So the Mishnah says, if there's a lot of money, a lot of assets, so we can assume that we can give the inheritance to the boys. They let them hold on to the inheritance and let them invest it and whatever. And they will, we would trust them, assuming they're trustable, we'll trust them that they will supply the daughters with mezainis, with sustenance until they get married, or till they return become an adult and they can take a job. So habonim yushu, if there's the sons will inherit, habonis yizainu, and the daughters will on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis, they'll get a check for their sustenance. But nuchasin mu'atim, but if there's very little assets, now the Mishnah doesn't define what does it mean little assets, but assuming there's little assets, so we can't let the boys inherit it because maybe they'll make a bad investment. And what's going to happen is there's not going to be enough for the daughters to have parnasa. So we put money in escrow, basically. The daughter should get all set aside in escrow, let's say sustenance, food, money for food. And the sons also have money a little bit, but let's say there's no money for the sons for food. The habonim, then the sons, yishalu al pesachim, then they'll have to knock on doors for tzedakah. So that's the halacha of the Mishnah. Adman says, bishvil sha'ani zochar hiftaditi, because I'm a male, I should lose out. Which the Gemara can explain what Adman means to say, but basically he's saying because he disagrees with this concept of that if there's very little assets, the sons should not inherit anything. It's midaraisa, they're supposed to inherit it. How do we disrupt the din Torah of the boys inheriting? So we don't understand what Adman is saying, but he's basically commenting on this halacha of the Mishnah when there's very little assets. So basically, maybe he's saying that no, we should leave it even when there's little assets. The boys should inherit, and the daughters should get the money from the investments that the boys are making until they get married, even if there's very little assets. Amar Rabbi Gamliel said, "Royani as divrei Admon." Whatever Admon said seemed to be appropriate in my eyes. So the Mishnah said that if there's a lot of assets, then we let the boys inherit right away, and we don't put anything in escrow. Says the Gemara of Akamo Merubit, how much is considered a lot of assets, and we trust the boys. Amar Rav Yehuda, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Kadeshi Zainmen Elu Be'elu Shnei Masa Chaydish. If there's enough assets in the estate that both the boys and the girls have enough food for 1 year, basically, that's called a lot of nechasim meruvim. If there's more than that, then the boys will inherit. That's the opinion of Rav. Kamisa kamei de Shmuel. When we said the statement of Rav to Shmuel, Amar, he said that's not the pshat. Zu divrei Rabbi Gamliel bar Rabbi. That's the words of Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi, who's different than Rabbi Gamliel in our Mishnah. But this is Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi, who explained the chachamim of the Mishnah, because the Rabbi Gamliel in our Mishnah just likes Admon. But this Rabbi Gamliel of Rabbi explained what the Rabbanan defined as nechasim merubim, as that that you need 12 months worth of food. Avo chachamim explaining the Tanakama is kidei sheyizoynim elu ve'elu ad sheyibagru. We need enough food in the estate that the boys should have enough food, and the girls should have enough food until they become an adult, till they're 12. So let's say they're 5 years old. It's not that you're going to need for the girls 1 year of food. That's called nechasim merubim. They have to have enough money in the estate that we're comfortable that there's enough food there to supply them till they turn 12 or till they get married. So that's then only then, if there's more than that, then the boys will take the inheritance, and the daughter will trust them that the daughters will get food, will get food when they need it. But if there's less than that, if there's not enough assets for that, then we just put everything into escrow so that the girls are secured with their sustenance until they become an adult. It was taught the same thing. Also, Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ravin said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, came and said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Amar lo Amar Rabba Babachana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Babachana, the student, said in the name of his Rabbi Yochanan, Kol sheyazoyin mehen elu be'elu achi bagru hein meruben. As long as there's enough food in there, there's enough assets in the estate that they both, the boys and the girls especially, should be able to have enough food guaranteed until they become an adult. That's called a lot. Then that's a big inheritance. But if there's less than that in the estate, that's little. That's called too little assets, and therefore we're going to put everything in escrow for the girls. Says the Gemara, and the Gemara just does some house cleaning just to explain it clearer. Let's say there's very little assets. So let's say, let us say there's $100,000 in the estate, and enough to support the girls. They would need $90,000. Let's say they're young girls, they need $90,000. So does that mean that because there's very little assets, the Gemara's question is, we're not going to give anything to the boys? That's what this means. We're going to go to the top of Kof Mem. Shaklu luhu banas lekula. The daughters are going to take everything, but the girls only need $90,000, and there's $10,000 extra. So the answer is very simple. Ella Amar Rava Rabbis explained. Yes, we set aside, we put $90,000 in escrow for the daughters until they become an adult. Bashar, the extra $10,000, Labanim will go to the boys. Bashar Labanim, the rest of them will go to the boys, and they'll inherit or use it for their sustenance or invest it, whatever they want to do with it. Says the Gemara, Pshita, it is very simple. If Reuben, let's say when the man died, there was a big estate, Vinismatu, and then it went down. In other words, let's say the value of the estate went down or the price of food went up. So do we have to now put things into escrow? No. The boys already got in hold of their inheritance, and we don't put anything in escrow. We just say that they still have the obligation to supply their sisters with food. But let's say there was very little assets. They put everything in escrow, and then it increased in value. How did it increase in value? The estate had an increase, or the price of food went down. So we say like this: who benefits from that? Is it the boys in their domain? This advantage happened. They got better in the hands of the Yarshim, and therefore we'll remove everything from escrow and now give it all to the boys. And Oidilma, or maybe Saluki Misalki Yarshim Hacha, but that once at the time of death, the Yarshim were not here. It didn't belong to the Yarshim. So therefore, it remains in escrow, and we don't pull it out of escrow once already, even though it's now increased as the estate became much more valuable. So that is the question of the Gemara. It was mu'atin. It started off as a small estate, and then it got into a large estate. Do we pull everything out of escrow and give it to the boys, like regular nechasim Reuben? So Tashma coming here. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Yisoimim shekadmu umachru b'nechasim mu'atim, Yisoimim that came and sold nechasim mu'atim. Let's say there was money supposed to go into escrow, and the Yisoimim sold that. Let's say that they sold the property that was considered a small estate, and they have now money. So do they have to put that into escrow? Or do you call back the sale because they didn't have a right to sell it because it was originally supposed to be put into escrow? So we see mashumachu machu, whatever they sold is considered a valid sale. So we see that the money that's in escrow really belongs to the Yarshim. It's just put into escrow so that there'll be guaranteed money for the daughters. It's possible that the daughters may not need that money. Either they can pass away, either they could get engaged at age 7 or 8, and they're not gonna, and the husband is supposed to provide the food. So it's escrow money for security, but it doesn't mean that it's all going to be used for the daughters, and therefore it really belongs to the boys, and that's part of the Yerusha. So if it started out as mu'atim, little amount of money, and it increased in value, so then you could pull everything out of escrow, because really it increased in value in the possession of the Yarshim, in the possession of the boys. And therefore, now it becomes Nechasim Reuben, nothing needs to be kept in escrow, and they're allowed to take that money, invest it, and supply the food for their sisters on a weekly basis. Says the Gemara, Yosef Rabbi Yirmiyah Kamed Rababol. Rabbi Yirmiyah was sitting in front of Rababol, and he had a couple of questions. Alman Osoi Mahu Shetamayit Benechosim. Alman Osoi Mahu Shetamayit Benechosim. That means, let's say there's enough money in the estate, it'll be called Nechosim Rubim if you just had to give the daughters food. This still would be called Nechasim Merubin. But let's say there's an almana to feed, a widow to feed. That's also part of the ksuba. And if we include her into the calculations, then it will make it into Nechasim Mu'atim, little assets. Mi Amrina, do we say, Kivin the Islah Mezayna, she's obligated, you're obligated to feed your widow, and that's also part of the ksuba. The mata, that will decrease the value of the assets to make it Nechasim Mu'atim. And then everything has to be put into escrow, or dilma, or maybe even the ilim menasva. There's a good chance that the almana will remarry. So Lesla, she's not her mazoinas that you're obligated to give her is not guaranteed that you're going to have to give it to her. Shahashtanami nesa. So we're not going to consider her part of the calculation of what obligations are on this assets to be able to determine if it's nechasim merubim or nechasim muatim. So that is the question of the Gemara. Even though the girl herself could get married, right? But the girl definitely is considered an inheritor in case there is no boys, not necessarily almana in when there's children. So the question is, does the almana's obligation of the ksuba to provide for the almana, is that included in the calculation to determine, to decrease the value, to make it nechasim muatim, or not? In Timtzalayman, if you want to say it's not included into calculation, even the ilu benaslet, since if the almana, the widow, potentially gets married, less law, there's no obligation to give her the mezainis. Hashtaname, less law. So also right now, we say we don't say that she has. She doesn't have, she's not part of the calculation of determining nechasim rubim, nechasim muatim. So now the question of the Gemara is, okay, let's say part of the obligation is that the man committed to providing for 5 years for his stepdaughter. That's part of his marriage with the second wife, that he was going to provide for his stepdaughter for 5 years of mezainis. Even if she gets married, it's a guaranteed 5-year mezainis. So the question is, Bas Ishta, if he has part of his obligations of the man that died, his obligation is to support his stepdaughter, the daughter of his wife, for 5 years, Mahu, Shetamayit Benechasim, does that be counted to diminish the assets to make it Nechasim Mu'atim or Nechasim Merubim? Mi Amrim, do you say, if this daughter, the stepdaughter, gets married, Nami Isla, she still gets her mezainis, the father has to provide it. Umamata, therefore, it minimizes the Nechasim Mu'atim. But there's also a possibility, even the Ilumesa, if his stepdaughter dies, Lesla, she's not going to get anything. And if she dies before the 5 years, it's not, so then it doesn't diminish the assets. So again, what the Gemara is giving me is determining is, you're right, you gave me a barrier that there's a difference if a person has nechasim mu'atim or nechasim merubim. Now we have to determine if there's outstanding obligations, does that be counted so that we're going to make it nechasim mu'atim or not? The imtin sulaim, if you want to say, keeping the less law, since if the stepdaughter would die, she's not going to get any She's not going to get fed. If she died, of course, she doesn't minimize the assets. She's not counted in minimizing the assets. But let's say there's a creditor. Mahu shimai minachosim. Does that minimize the assets outstanding? Does that minimize the assets outstanding? Me, I'm reading him. Do we say even nami islay? Since if a creditor, let's say a loan's coming due, but it didn't come due yet. Does that count it? Even if the creditor dies, you still have to pay his yarshim because he made a loan. It's concluded into the minimizing the assets, and we're deducting from the assets. Since it's missing collection, it would not diminish the amount of the assets, since at the end of the day, the creditor didn't collect yet. But when he collects, then we'll figure it out. Maybe you'll take from the escrow, and that's when he'll collect. But or we'll take from the boys. But at the end of the day, it wasn't collectible yet, so therefore it will not be considered in the accounting of outstanding liabilities to determine if you have nechasim rabim or nechasim muatim. And others ask this question going the opposite way. Again, we'll start from a balchoiv. Does a balchoiv, a creditor, deduct from the value of the assets to make it nechasim mu'atim? And we say bas. If you say that not, then bas ishtoi, because it's not collectible. Bas ishtoi ma'ush tamat b'nechasim. The daughter of, if you want to say that a balchoiv would deduct, that's because even if he died, he's still obligated to pay. But bas ishtoi, even if she dies, you're not going to be obligated to pay. So maybe that will not be minimized in the chasim. Almanosoi, but let's say you're the widow. If you want to say bas ishtoi is mamayit, then what about almana? And almana, would that minimize the nechasim with the assets? Because bas ishtoi, if David Almanasi, there's a good chance she gets married, and then you're not obligated at all to pay for that obligation. Now the Gemara asks a question, new question. Question is like this: Almanasi ubas, and let's say in the estate she left over a widow and a daughter, and there's only food for one of them, and that both of them are asking, "I want the mezainis because of the ksuba." So since it's a drabanan, which one takes precedent? Ezom hem kedamis. It's a new question. Which one takes the precedence? Which one is guaranteed the food? Amalei. So this was a question from Rav Yirmiyah in front of Rav Abo. And so Rav Abo told him, Zilha, go away today. Come tomorrow, I'm going to investigate the matter. He also, when Yirmiyah returned, Amalei, so Rav Abo answered, I can answer one question. I know you asked me a bunch of questions of how do you determine the chasim merubim, the chasim mu'atim, but you asked me a fourth question, which is not related, is if you have an almona and a daughter, which one will get the food guaranteed in escrow, and the other one will have to knock on doors. Rabasi said also almona eitzel abas kebas eitzel acha, that the almona in relation to the daughter is like the daughter in relation to the brothers. The nechasim mu'atim. That means the advantage goes to the widow. Ma bas eitzel, when there's a daughter versus brothers, and there's only enough food for let's say the daughter or the brothers. Habas designers, the daughter gets the food, and the brothers yishalu al psachim, they knock on doors because it's more honorable if the boys will collect tzedakah rather than the girls. So the daughters are guaranteed the food. So also almona eitzel abbas. If you're dealing with a widow versus the daughters, and you only have food for one of them, so from the estate, almona and izonis, then the widow gets the food. Abbas, the daughter, tishal al sachim, she's the one that goes and starts collecting. And you see that like in Rus, and when Rus did the collecting, and Rus did the collecting, and her mother-in-law stayed home. Admin says, B'shvil shani zocha ifsadati. That's what Admin said in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, my comma, what did Admin mean to say? Abaye said, Hachi Kama. This is what Admin means to say. Because I'm a male. And therefore I should be inheriting and use the money to invest. Why should I put things into escrow? Because I can use the money, I want to sit in coils. Let me invest the money. I lose out. Now I have to put everything in escrow, and now I can't inherit because there's very little assets. Amalei Rabba. So Rabba said, if that's the pshat naman, it doesn't make sense. Elamato man da asa b'tayr hu diyarus the lo asa b'tayr lo yarus. The admin determines inheritance based on the boy learning Torah. If the boy doesn't learn Torah, then he shouldn't inherit. I mean, do you understand that you understand that a boy inherits no matter what? So that cannot be the meaning of behind what Admin is saying, that by nuchasim mu'atem the boy should inherit because they learn Torah. Let's say the boys are not learning Torah. They inherit because midaraisa, that's what they're supposed to get. I mean, so what was Admin upset when there's nechasim mu'atim that there should not be anything put into escrow? El Amaravara says, Hochi Kama. This is what Admin meant to say. B'shvil sha'ani zacha, because I'm a male. Ro ani liraish min nechasim mu'atim. Robin, by when there's a lot of assets, midaraisa, I'm supposed to inherit, right? You agree that you put nothing in escrow when there's a lot of assets. If zadati ben mu'atim, so then when there's very little assets, you put something in escrow and now you push away the din da'araisa. Admin doesn't like that. You trust him. If you trust him when there's a lot of assets, trust him when there's very little assets that they're going to provide for their sister, and let them invest the money. Zok the Mishnah. We'll just do the Mishnah. The Mishnah is discussing about who inherits. You know, a boy inherits. If there's only girls, the girls inherit. If there's boy versus girls, the boys inherit, the girls get food. But let's say hiniach bonin a guy left over boys and girls, tumtum and loyalenu left over a tumtum. Tumtum is somebody who's undetermined because there's a membrane blocking their erva, and we don't know if they're a boy or a girl. So bisman shanachasim, if there's a lot of assets, so would the tumtum inherit with the boys? Do you consider them a boy? So no. The boys tell him, you're not part of the inheritance. You're like a girl, and we're going to just provide for you food till you get to whatever happens to you become an adult. But you're not part of the inheritance. Nuchas mu'atim, with very little assets, and you're putting money for food into escrow. So Hanakevis, the girls, they push him away and say, you are a male, and therefore you cannot take from our escrow money food for yourself because we'll consider you as a boy. So he really loses out. So again, the Mishnah says, a person says, if my wife gives birth to a male, yitel mana, I want that child to take a mana. Or maybe my wife should take a mana, whatever. Yolda zacha, she gives birth to a male, yitel mana, she takes a mana. Nikeva, if my wife gives birth to a female, masayim, I want her to get 200 zuz. Or the girl to get 200 zuz. Yolda nekeva, nitals masayim. Now, im zachar monim nekeva masayim. Let's say he said, if my wife gives birth to a zachar, you take a mana, or if she gives birth to an akeva, you take a masayim. Yolda zachar nekeva, and he was blessed with twins, a boy and a girl. Zachar noitel mana, the keva noiteles masayim. Then the zachar will take a mana, and the nekeva will take a masayim. Again, when you're very clear that you want to give money to the male or the female, they get their money based on your commitment. But Yolda Tumtum, but let's say you committed for a male or a female a certain amount of money for the child, and then it turns out that she gave birth to a Tumtum, someone who's undetermined, an undetermined sex. Ain and Noitel, then the child doesn't take anything. But if you said, Kol Mashataylit Ishli, whatever my wife will give birth to, Yitol, this child should take. So you didn't determine based on sex, but you determined based on a human being. Then the tumtum will take whatever your commitment was. Then Ein Sham Yairish. Let's say a man died and had no children, Elahu, only the tumtum, and he's not a male or a female. So then Yairish Sakal, he inherits the entire assets of the father, because at the end of the day, he or she is a child, but he's an undetermined boy or girl, but since it's not competing against any other children, so it will inherit everything. So we'll discuss more tomorrow regarding the din of tumtum.